Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Nice to have such a full house. Appreciate you all coming out tonight. My name is Madeline. I'm the events coordinator here at Malaprop. So just wanted to welcome you all here, give you a couple housekeeping notes, and then introduce our guest tonight. Just a friendly reminder, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phones, authors included. That way we don't have any disruption. We have two restrooms down the hallway. They take a code to get in. And if you don't already have a book, you're welcome to just head to the registers. The booksellers back there will print out the code for you. So, and you don't have to buy anything, you just ask them for a code. We do have the new How I Got You Your Ounce book available behind the counter. As an indie bookstore, we appreciate any support you can offer us. This is obviously the book launch for this book, so our authors will also appreciate any sales that they can get. So just wanted to kind of give a sweet plug. This is a feel-good activity to support your local authors and local indie bookstore. We do close at 7 tonight, so we just ask that if you're interested in getting a book after the event, go ahead and head to the counter to purchase that before coming up to talk to the authors or each other. That way our booksellers can close the registers down on time. We also have a live stream audience tonight, so hello everyone joining us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I will send you all some information on how to ask a question for our Q&A portion at the end of the night, and I will be happy to ask that question on your behalf. All right, I think that's all for our housekeeping. So we are very excited to host Jimmy X and Nan K. Chase tonight for the launch of their new book, How I Got You Your Ounce, A Pot Dealer's Journey Through American History, joined in conversation by Marilyn Ball. Jimmy X, I'm trying to give quotations, is a pseudonym. Jimmy X spent more than 5 decades as a marijuana dealer in New York City, beginning in high school in 1967 and retiring in 2020, selling a total of nearly 5 tons. His anonymity preserves both his privacy and that of his longtime customers. How I Got You Your Ounce is his first book. Nan K. Chase is the author of Asheville, A History and Lost Restaurants of Asheville, among other nonfiction titles. Her freelance journalism has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Southern Living, Air and Space Magazine, and Mountain Express. She currently works as a ghostwriter. And Marilyn Ball, a 48-year resident of Asheville, is the author of The Rise of Asheville, An Incredible History of Community Building, and the host of the iHeartRadio show and global podcast, Speaking of Travel. Please join me in welcoming Jimmy X, Nan K. Chase, and Marilyn Ball.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Marilyn Ball, and I have to be honest, when this team invited me to be the moderator tonight for Jimmy X and Nan on their new book launch, I wasn't exactly sure. I thought maybe it was because I've been researching this stuff for so long myself. But I'm so glad to be a part of all of this. And, you know, especially living in Asheville for such a long time, we all know that the marijuana industry, you know, for so long was in the back rooms and in the back corners. And then it became more accessible and more legal. And here's Jimmy, who has been doing this for quite a long time. So I want to welcome him for being here and for Nan for working together. And basically the way the format is going to go is that I've got questions and I'm going to be talking to both of them so that we can really get down deep into what this story is all about and how Jimmy came to be the rock star that he is today, right? All right, but first I want to start with Nan, because Nan, this baby is all yours, together with Jimmy, of course, but give us a little backstory on how that all came to be.
Thanks, Marilyn. I'm going to read from the preface because I think that tells the story succinctly. Jimmy X is a real person, but that's not his real name. All the events described are true. He says most of them are true. I met Jimmy more than 30 years ago at a small New York City dinner party hosted by a mutual friend. Asking people what they did for a living wasn't done, but I generally knew him as a business consultant energetic but laid back and always good for laughs. During my first post-COVID visit to New York, I saw Jimmy again, and his romantic partner mentioned that he had retired recently. From what? I asked. Oh, he sold pot. That's all he did. Apparently, I was the last to know. Jimmy had never displayed the bling and bravado or sense of danger we commonly associate with full-time drug dealers. I was intrigued. As a one-time investigative reporter, now active as a ghostwriter, I immediately proposed that we write a book together, not only about his experiences during more than half a century of dealing pot, but also about the shifts in American culture during that time, an insider's view of how we got here today and where we're headed. I was especially interested in the Sherlock Holmes nature of Jimmy's career. Hiding in plain sight was the way he maintained a highly illegal career for decades, and that took work. We collaborated on the memoir project Long Distance, conducting many hours of phone interviews. Jimmy told his tale, and I helped to shape it into narrative form.
Well, thank you for doing all of that because it's an intriguing story and one that is very historical. I mean, how many people do we really know who were doing that back in the day? But Nan, you had mentioned ghostwriting. Give us just a little idea of what that means. Are you hiding in plain sight?
Actually, I think that's a good way to put it. I had a long career as a freelance writer, and during COVID, it really turned to mush. It just disappeared. Editors disappeared into the woodwork, and I had to shift. And I had the opportunity to write a couple of different works for other people, so mostly memoirs. So I think of ghostwriting as telling somebody else's story in their own words. So that meant getting the tone of the story and the voice. And so what I particularly liked about doing How I Got You Your Ounce was that we did phone interviews. Jimmy's in New York City and I'm in Southwest Virginia. We didn't do Zoom because I didn't want the distraction of looking at somebody. And we didn't use any of the apps that go from voice to written transcripts. And I've tried those. They're very efficient, but they're flat. There's no inflection. It's lines of type. And so by talking on the telephone with Jimmy, I could concentrate on his voice, and I can type almost as fast as somebody can talk. So we would talk for 1 or 2 hours, once or twice a week. It took us about 10 months to write the book. And that's how we did it. At the end of each session, I could hit the print button, but I was adding emphasis all along the way. So if he said something that was really cool, I could make a note of that. And so 99% of the book is exactly his words and his voice. So that's what ghostwriting is to me.
Well, I don't know how you could not make Jimmy's words cool, right? I mean, he's one cool dude, and I want to get right into doing all of that. I do want to say just a little shout out to Nan. She has a number of other books that are available right here in Malaprops. So be sure before you leave that you could pick them up. History books of Asheville, and you have gardening books too, if I'm not mistaken.
I do, but I think those have probably, as they say, sunk into the soil. Unless you're busy promoting those, they don't go real far.
Right.
But thanks, Marilyn.
Well, of course. All right, well, let's get started with Jimmy here. So Jimmy, I want to hear about the story, but I think we all want to start at the beginning, like in the 60s. And we can all, for those of you who can maybe put your head back in the 60s, what it was like back in those days, give us an idea what it was like for you.
Okay, maybe we can set the scene a little bit. I started selling weed in the fall of 1967. Okay, so what was happening? I'm in high school. The Fillmore East is about to open. It was February of 1968. Another thing that was happening is student governments were getting money to book rock acts. So me and friends of mine, I already had a somewhat successful business by March of 1968. I took a dozen of my friends to see the Jimi Hendrix Experience at Hunter College. 800 seats, Jimi Hendrix Experience. And then 2 weeks later, Cream, same deal. right? So it was really a lot about music. The scene I come out of, I'm a Queens kid. We all were listening to the Beatles and the Stones when they started, when we were like preteens. And then as the rock era grew, we got into music. And the beginning of selling weed was remarkably successful because it was the right product at the right time. You know what I'm saying? Because just music sounds better, right? You know, so that was the bare beginnings.
So tell me, what was your first big deal?
Well, you get your copy of the book, there'll be a part that says the transition in the business. I, like many kids, learned you could buy a quarter pound of weed and sell 3 ounces to your friends and get an ounce to smoke for free, which seemed like, wow, that's amazing. But then within weeks, I had to sell what was left of my ounce, so I had to buy another quarter pound. The big change was buying a pound, right? So here, this story is not in the book. This is exclusive for Malaprop, okay, in New York. I went to a friend of a friend on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and in the stairwell of a West End Avenue apartment building, I handed him $80. And he handed me, he said, a pound of Acapulco gold, right? It was loose in a brown paper shopping bag with pages of the New York Times on top, camouflage, right? And I took this, it was pungent, right? Onto the subway back to Queens, just carrying the bag, right? And then me and a couple of friends tried it. It was like unbelievable. We got really fucked up, right? And I said to them, this was, meaning I got lucky, right? There was dirt weed around. You could get that. And I didn't really know the difference, you know, at least in terms of the look, right? But this was really exciting, made some good money, and it really made the word got out. Oh man, Jimmy's got like the best. So that was my first big deal.
Well, that is a big deal. And before you knew it, it was the 70s, and that was a totally different vibe. So give us an idea of what that was like, and maybe even some memorable characters that came around.
Yeah. Okay, so in the 70s, I'm getting into like, I'm in my 20s, right? My early 20s, mid-20s. And I actually began to travel, right? So I'm now going to read this is actually one of maybe my favorite story, right? Because, weed deal is supposed to have stories. Here's one, right? Okay. One time in 1975, I was flying back from California after visiting some friends. For 6 hours, I'm sitting next to a guy who appears to be in his mid-20s, a little older than I was at the time. He looks hip, but not hippie. Like maybe he's in the music business. The right hair, the LA cool vibe. We're ordering drinks, rapping, telling stories, talking about rock concerts we've been to, Jimi Hendrix, other great shows. We move into talking how fun it was getting high. It's clear we're loosening up to each other, getting to the point where we now feel each other is hip, meaning not a cop. So he tells me about this fantastic weed that comes in from Thailand. He tells me he'd been a Vietnam vet serving in the US Navy and was now sailing for the Merchant Marine. And then he reveals to me that he goes to Thailand 3 times a year and fills up 2 duffel bags with this Thai weed, which is pre-wrapped on sticks. Remember Tide sticks, Cheech and Chong? Yeah, them. And taking it to the United States on commercial boats. Well, I did my jaw up before it hits the floor. I said, that's amazing. We haven't seen that weed yet in New York. And I asked, who do you sell this stuff to? He says, Leon Russell and the Shelter People. Big musicians at the time who happened to go through 2 duffel bags of Thai stick every 4 months. Not only is this guy a dealer, but he's a smuggler moving vast quantities of Thai sticks like they were packs of cigarettes. He's in the sweetest scene imaginable. He unloads his shit directly to well-heeled customers in one delivery, no less. And he was just a hip guy I happened to meet on a plane going back to New York.
That is a great story. So let's just transition. It sounds like there was a lot going on, a lot of good weed coming in, a lot of excitement. But as that decade came to a close and the 80s started creeping in, give us a little idea on what was happening, because things kind of took a nosedive, if I recall.
Yeah, I mean, the 80s, you have like crack hitting the streets all over New York. You have AIDS hitting the gay and other communities. You know, New York City is kind of a mess, recovering from kind of going broke in the mid to late 70s. It turns out it was a great decade for me and other apartment dealers in New York, because there was tremendous expansion. You got to remember, in the late 60s and into the 70s, you have all kinds of rock lyrics. At first, it was sort of veiled drug references, and then it was like right out there, you know, Dead Flowers by the Rolling Stones. What are they talking about? You know what I mean? And there was a lot of shifting going on. I was beginning to meet some, you know, a few bigger dealers. I never wanted to be a bigger dealer, never became one. But I was becoming what I call an odd lot guy. You know, these big dealers, they get 30, 50, 100 pounds at a time. They get to an end of a trip and they had like, you know, 6.5 ounces left. And none of their customers were interested in 6.5 ounces. I am, right? And I'm getting kind of a good price. And then in 1985, I met Adele. Go to the book for this one. I met Adele just once. We had lunch at a hole-in-the-wall Japanese restaurant on East 9th Street, just off the Bowery. It was late 1985, and she had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. She was about to move to California for holistic treatment. She was retiring from the business, and Adele had quite the business. A wholesale division, which I heard she had given to another large dealer in Brooklyn. She was someone who could flip 5 or 10 pounds of weed at a time. She also had a retail business, actually 2 of them. One was showroom. People visited her at one of her apartments, looked at what was available, maybe sampled the wares, and made a purchase and left. She gave that business to Gary, my main man on the Lower East Side. After handing over her showroom book, she asked Gary if he knew anyone who could handle her delivery business. Gary said, "I know just the guy." Me. A phone call, and 2 days later, Adele and I were sitting across from each other, sharing an edamame appetizer at a sushi restaurant. She was a short, thin woman with shoulder-length black hair and a kind of dreamy but streetwise demeanor. Crafty but shy, a native New Yorker who could make herself invisible and think on her feet. Not mafia protected, but obviously someone you didn't want to mess with, because someone on her side would mess with you right back. I'd say she was in her early to mid 40s. I was in my mid 30s. We made some small talk. She told me about the spa in Sonoma County. That was her first stop. Then she took out a small alphabetized phone book. So we're eating our sushi deluxes, and she reads me the names and phone numbers of the customers that she delivered to, along with relevant descriptions as to their proclivities. Likes exotic, but needs variety. Don't give him the same thing more than twice in a row. Or you can extend credit to her, but not to him. She also spun some yarns, portraying a dark sense of humor, told some hilarious stories, insider stuff that only someone in the business would get. I took copious notes. A couple of folks I inherited from her list were among the most famous people I've ever met. One was a world-famous artist near the end of his life, and the other was a renowned screenwriter. The artist was disorganized to the max, but painting at a furious pace in order to assure his legacy. Adele advised me always to bring more weed than he ordered because he was so scatterbrained that he'd forget how much he wanted. When I got to his place, he would invariably have to rummage through his studio to find the money he had stashed somewhere. The screenwriter was kind of the opposite, very organized and always needed an ounce of the best weed in order to get his work done. I would bring double what he ordered, and he usually bought it all. By the time Adele and I had finished our entrees, I had case histories of some 45 people. I said, Adele, I can't thank you enough. How do you want to handle payment? Lump sum or VIG as I go? She laughed and said, just pick up the tab. Including a generous tip, I had doubled my client list for $25. Of course, that was, 1985. She flew to the West Coast the next day. I heard some years later that the treatments were successful and she was alive and well in Northern California. That all happened more than 35 years ago, and several of those clients are still with me when I retired. They were my best customers. Bless you, Adele.
Did they have a retirement party for you, Jimmy?
Well, that would have been really out of character.
That probably would.
We did smoke a little weed.
That's right. All right, so here's what I'm thinking. You've met quite a few characters in your time. It sounds like a lot of exotics and crazies. But what was really, looking back, maybe the funniest encounter that you ever had?
Okay, another one. You teamed me up great.
I
should take this shit on the road.
All right. You pick up the tab.
So I'll preface this by saying my basic feeling over the years is no one would voluntarily retire from the weed business. Right, particularly as the years went on, it actually got safer because there was less enforcement. Right, you may remember when Obama came in, Eric Holder said, we are not going to enforce federal marijuana statutes. Said it publicly, right? And that was more of a gradual process. I mean, we used to have, I had mentors, I had people who had ears to the ground. You would hear about busts that were about to happen or beginning to happen, right? So I retired in 2020. I hadn't heard about a bust in almost 20 years in New York. So that's what we're talking about. But back in the 70s, people were getting busted. And sometimes they would retire after that. They'd say, okay, I had enough. And sometimes it was utterly by accident. So here's a story of a dealer friend of mine who got busted when the cops misidentified him in what was supposed to be a heroin bust. Okay. So this friend of mine lived in Brooklyn. This was right about the time that Hawaiian weed hit town. Like after the ties came the Hawaiian. The Hawaiians were even zingier than the right? So he's in his apartment watching a Yankees game with a friend, and of course, they're smoking a Hawaiian. And his friend says, this shit is fucking awesome. My friend says, it's Hawaiian. Friend is bug-eyed. You gotta get me an ounce of this. Well, the source of the Hawaiian lives 10 blocks away. So my friend hops in his car, drives the 10 blocks, gets the ounce of weed right, and then stops at a bodega on the way back to pick up a few groceries. The ounce is in his pocket. So he drops it in the bag from the bodega and drives back. And wow, he says, there's a parking spot open right in front of my building. So he just pulls in, goes to get the bag, and 6 undercover cops descend on him. Now, these cops look like YMCA by the Village People.
Mm.
I don't know if you remember that one, and they even had little videos of that, right? So like, one of them is wearing a hard hat, another has a sailor's hat, another's dressed as a hippie. So the Village People grab his bag of groceries, pull out his ounce of Hawaiian and say, shit, you're not the guy. It was a sting operation for somebody else who lived in his building, a heroin dealer. So they were keeping that parking space open for the supposed heroin dealer in case he drove back in. So my man was like mega unlucky. The cops ordinarily would have just taken the ounce of Hawaiian and let him go, but they'd already called for backup and had to go through with the arrest. In the end, the charges were dismissed. Lakota, the assistant district attorney, the ADA for the case, was a customer of this guy. And after the charges got dropped, they went back to the ADA's house and smoked some Hawaiian.
Well, that is very funny, but sad and funny at the same time. Okay, so you mentioned going from the 70s, 80s. You know, now we're up to a point where after decades of this being underground, like you're saying, it's starting to become more mainstream, and we're watching a billion-dollar industry start to unfold. Give me an idea of what it was like for you to start seeing this industry shifting.
Right. Now, for the sake of transparency, Marilyn and I talked a little already about this and done some email. So I said, I gotta look at the map. I really, it's a little bit small. I could, you know, I don't have the visuals totally together. It's kind of amazing, all these states that have gone legal, right? And some of them are in what I guess is called flyover territory. They ain't on the East Coast, they ain't on the West Coast. You know, Oklahoma, Missouri, South Dakota, Montana. Colorado was even huge, right? It was one of the earliest states to go recreational. I mean, the way it felt is it started like a really, like I don't surf, but I understand big waves are real important, right? And so it started out like, oh, here comes some big waves. And then it was like a tsunami. Like in the 2010s, it seemed like every week there was another thing on the ballot that was passing, right? And it was, you know, and but it was really a mixed bag now, because I have, you know, mentors and friends pretty much on both coasts and some in the middle. Knew some, it's in the book, knew some growers in Kentucky, right? And what was happening, one way to look at what was happening, there are a lot of narratives on this, but one way to look at what was happening was in state after state, what the authorities decided to do as it went legal, and they were like, you know, enabling the legislation, if you will, was they kept the growers in place, but cut out everybody else in what I call the legacy black market, right? They had a different middleman structure, and now they were going to have dispensaries on street corners and so forth, right? And have this like legit business, right? And you have the dynamic that weed is still a Schedule I, the most illegal, like with heroin and other narcotics, right? No redeeming social value, no medical use. You can't even do research on it, right? That's the federal level. And then you have all these states. It's like 24 states now with recreation, right? I mean, there's, you know, there's almost no states on this map that don't have some green color, right? And so the states are left to their own. So what does that set up, right? There's many disadvantages. On a legal level, right? People who are trying to build legit businesses in these states, they cannot get bank loans. They cannot accept credit cards at their establishments. They cannot write their expenses off on their taxes. And now some of them had been in the legacy black market and some were new to it. But still, everybody had to pay these licensing fees and pay taxes because the politicians were into like, hey, this is a cash cow. We're going to make all this money. Every state projected way more money than they actually ended up making, right? Bad setup. But the other part, and this is the part which makes the marijuana press, but did not make the legit press, certainly for many, many years. So think about it. Part of it was the weed sold in that particular state had to be grown in that state. So let's give an example. Southern Oregon, one of the great places, one of the best weed in the world. It's grown in Southern Oregon. Oregon doesn't have that many people. It's a few million people. They grow, and now they can grow legally like tons of weed. Now, again, this is a market. In fact, the legacy black market was, right, a so-called unregulated market, but and this was your line, Dan, and I thank you for it. It had a regulation that's one of the greatest regulations in capitalism, a free market. Okay, well, let's go back to my Oregon example. Okay, so now you have more and more supply, right? Some increase in demand, but that has a ceiling with the 3 million people, right? So the price of weed began to go down, right? So now the growers who were allowed in are being impoverished, right? And it got to the point that they were auctioning off pounds of weed for any price that people could name. And this is not garbage weed. This is not dirt weed. This is great weed, right? And I began hearing stories of people going broke. I began hearing stories of, I think the phrase was, going back to the private sector, right? So now they go back to try to ship the weed across the country. But the supply chains had been broken, right? Because the legacy black market is a pyramid, right? There's a handful of people at the top who are manufacturing, if you will, and then there's layers, right? And I live sort of near the bottom of the pyramid. I sold to the actual consumer, right? Well, it got to go through a lot of steps to get to me, and it became harder and harder to get the weed because the guys who were growing it, who were shipping it, had gone legal and stopped the shipping it, right? So that calcified and disappeared. And then when they tried to reinitiate it, right, it was with great difficulty, right? So the legalization at the state level combined with the heavy illegalization at the federal level has combined to basically make the legacy black market disappear. And the new market is just constantly in financial trouble. And it got to the point that, and this began to make headlines even in the mainstream press in California, and this started a number of years ago and got worse. People stopped paying their vendors. How can you run a business when you're not paying your vendors? I mean, let's get real here, right? So it was really a mixed bag because it was exciting. It was now a bigger thing. It was totally accepted in the polls, 68%, 72%, saying they favor total legalization and all this. And a lot of people who I knew, some of them I was very close to, were losing their livelihood and even losing their savings, right? So not a happy picture, right? So that's maybe a little long-winded, but that's my take.
Well, it's a thing, right? Well, on a upper note,
Yes.
I want to encourage everybody to read this book because there's so many great stories and a history that a lot of us, especially who've lived through the decades like you have, Jimmy, recognize that there's been a shift and that things are changing and that the industry is changing. But I want to open it up to our audience here and see if they have questions, because Nan, I'd like you to get back in the fray here as far as how the book was written and how that you might have some questions for Jimmy. Not about where he is today, but what it was like for him back in the past.
I'm at Malaprop. By the way, I am extremely happy to be here. I mean, this is a legendary indie bookstore, and I am all about indie,
Well,
right?
shout out.
I am super happy.
All right, so does anybody have any questions? And yes, oh, well,
So, Jimmy, you led this secret life for decades. What made you decide to come out in the open with your story, and then how hard of a decision was that?
well, why don't you repeat that so the people who are watching
Oh, okay.
can hear that too?
Okay, so I'm gonna paraphrase. I've been kind of clandestine, right, for a very long time. And then, things began to change. And what made me decide to come out into the open, right? And how hard a decision was that? Is that right? Okay.
Got it.
Okay, well, the simple reason I came out in the open is Nan gave me a call and said, I think we got a great book here and we can do it together. It was giving me the opportunity to work with a great writer, right? And have a lot of fun. And I even talked to my attorney, right? Now, my attorney, in fact, was invited on to the New York State Marijuana Commission. I mean, he's been doing a lot of marijuana law, along with other stuff too. And he wouldn't go on. He said, no, this is a shit show. We are not doing this, right? I talked to him, I said, man, what do you think? I might want to do a book. He said, well, make up a name. Okay, we did that. And he said, well, he's a funny guy. He says, well, it's obviously you're kind of admitting to some past illegal activity, right? That raises stuff. It is not viewed in the same light even by the authorities anymore. And it's ultimately, and this is one of his favorite phrases over the years, it's a business decision. I'm not even in the business anymore, right? Now we're in the business of trying to proselytize the book. So I mean, I thought about maybe not doing it, but I thought it would be like a fun thing to do, right? And as we just got a review in High Times, like 5 days ago, something like that. And so go to hightimes.com, you can search for it and see. It's a great review. The guy's a good writer. And I forget the phrase exactly, but he says this part of the story doesn't make the historical accounts, right? I mean, there are write-ups, but most of it is the more sensational. I had 18-wheelers and I shipped weed from British Columbia to the East Coast, or I bought into boats and got weed shipped up from South America and stuff like that. These are the stories that have been told, but the story that's actually kind of more grassroots and in some ways more real. I mean, people actually smoke this stuff. It isn't just shipped in 18-wheelers, right? And I would estimate, if you just do the arithmetic, there were 20 to 30,000 small retail dealers in New York City certainly by the 80s and 90s, right? I knew a lot of them. I still know a bunch. He says, and he got lucky. He never got arrested. I know 10 guys who never got arrested, right? So I figured, okay, on balance, I think this is a story worth getting out there, right? And Nan was wonderful. Was able to, get some stuff out of me and add a little wrinkle in terms of setting the stage for the cultural changes in the United States, right? And this is part of the cultural changes in the United States. So I feel like, okay, I feel proud of having done that. And a lot of people in this business, we didn't tell them to do anything wrong. This is a safe product. We weren't selling hard drugs. People weren't getting strung out, right? So yeah, I did hesitate initially, and then I said, nah, let's do it. And then once we got into it, it was a blast.
Well, who wouldn't want to work with Nan? I mean,
So,
it's very
got it
true.
out.
There you go. All right, Leanne, you had a question?
I do have a question, and what a great insight you have on this whole the topic and how it has changed. I'm just wondering, how did you pay your income tax, or did you?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I got myself an accountant,
Uh-huh.
right? Who didn't really know what maybe
Yeah.
he knew what I did, but
That's
you know,
where I'm
you're not so,
going.
you know, you've seen all the gangster movies. You don't tell your accountant what you do, you tell your lawyer. what you do. You know, there's no accountant client privilege. But and I've done some other things. I've actually done a little bit of business consulting. As a kid, I had some, regular jobs, like after I dropped out of college. But no, we would give myself an income and I would pay the town. I'm collecting Social Security right now.
Leanne, to add to that, when we got started, I said, if you didn't pay your taxes, I can't do the project. Because
Sure.
as you know, for freelancers, that's part of the deal, and
Yeah.
Jimmy's a good citizen.
Mhm.
To me, one of the most exciting and interesting things, not so much that as the Sherlock Holmes, the how did you hide in plain sight? So that's part of the book that goes through the whole thing, but yeah, the tax question was relevant.
Yes, you have a question?
Hi, yeah, it's kind of a two-part. So for Nan, what was your process of like guiding through the interview? Was it sort of free form, or did you go kind of chronological in telling the story and trying to get the story out?
And repeat that out, so for our people.
What was
who
the
are
process
watching.
of going,
Mhm.
of constructing the narrative? How was it done? We made an outline.
Okay.
And we did everything by phone, so we had a couple of conversations and wrote down what are the topics we want to hit. And basically in chronological order. And especially the last chapter goes into the downside of legalization and also how the market fell apart during COVID and that type of thing. The interviews didn't exactly stick to the outline, so there was a bit of cut and paste. So if there were some chunks that I said, okay, we're just gonna pick that up and move it into another chapter. But it was pretty smooth because we stuck to the outline and had a fairly consistent structure a couple times a week for it took about 10 months. Then we wasted 5 months trying to find a publisher and that didn't work out so well. So it's a slow process.
I mean, this woman is highly organized. I'm just high.
Oh, you had a second part?
Yes, for Jimmy. So what was your process for preparing for this? Did you, were you pulling from notes over the years, journals, or is this a lot of just memories and stories
And repeat that.
Yeah, was I pulling from notes, or just spinning yarn, basically, telling some stories? More the latter than the former, though I did have an outline and sometimes I did look up some stuff, or I'd make a call. I'm in touch. I mean, most of the people I work with over the years are retired if they're alive. And so I would talk with them. I'd say, okay, and I mean, and they would remind me maybe of a great story, but they'd also remind me of sort of both the business realities and the vibe of particular periods, like what it was for them, because sometimes they were actually involved in transportation. See, the difference between a big dealer and a little dealer is transportation. Do you do transportation? Can you get the weed from where it is grown to where it is going to be sold? Right? Because way back in the day, there were no growers in New York. Right? Once indoor got developed, there were some. Right? But really, the job of the people higher up in the pyramid was to get it somewhere, right? And I have a number of stories where I would meet people. I met a guy in Hawaii, right? And I picked him up, a hitchhiker on Maui, and I went to his grow and we had a great time. And it was a simple conversation. He said, "You know any way to get it off the island?" I said, "No." He said, "Here, have an ounce." And that was it. No business. Because you couldn't do the business. I wasn't that guy. When Hawaiian hit New York, I sold it like hotcakes, but I had to get it.
That's a whole different story, I'm sure. So all the more reason to grab your book before you leave. And like she said too, you could pay before we go. You have a question back here?
Yeah, you talked about, the woman that you bought her book for the price of a dinner.
Adele, yeah.
You mentioned that she had people, you wouldn't want to mess with her because then she had people who might mess with you. When you stepped up into that size of business, did you have such people? And second part is when you retired, did you sell your book for the price of an iced dinner?
Okay.
Now repeat that so they can
Okay,
hear.
so did I have protection in the sense that Adele had protection, whatever that was for Adele? And did I sell my book when I retired? Okay, no, I never really had protection. I mean, Adele had been the partner of one of the larger dealers I ever met, right? So and again, I don't really know if she had protection, but being in that inner circle, right, they would work things out, right? I wish I had a book to sell. The business was so small. I remember remarking right before I retired to a couple of friends who knew me, over the years. I said, I'm doing, not in dollar amounts, but in quantity. I'm doing less business now than I did in high school.
Oh.
It really just, and I ended up with stock. Not a lot, but not nothing. And I gave it as gifts to the handful of clients who were left. And they said, do you have anybody who can take over? I said, I wish I did. But literally everybody around me was gone, because if you picture the pyramid, I only know, you hear all kinds of stories, you hear the street, etc. But who I had 6 or 7 contacts I could buy from, and they maybe had 2 or 3, and there might be some overlaps, and then you go up. So the pyramid's like this, but my life is more like that on that chart, right? And also, it was like there were dispensaries now, and so people, and then the pandemic hit, and I realized, oh God, this is really going to go away. I don't know how long we're going to be locked down. I don't know how long there's going to be an impact, right? And then, of course, in New York, Cuomo legalized it and then did nothing to set it up. This screwed the new growers in New York. They grew all this weed that a legal dispensary didn't open for almost 2 years. It's an agricultural product. You can't throw it in the, we'll put it in the freezer. No.
What a life, right? All right, well, I think we have time for one more question. Anybody here? Oh, here we go.
I'm Nan's longtime husband, and therefore Jimmy X's longtime friend. And I, like Nan, had no idea what he did. It just never came up. So my question, Jimmy, is how did you so effectively fool not only me, but the people in New York City and the cops in New York City? What were your particular strategies that made you invisible?
Repeat that.
So, Sal was saying that he knew me for years and did not know that I was a dealer, right? So how was I hidden in plain sight? A lot of this book is about that. I'll give a little bit. As you can see, I like to talk, right? And I read stuff and I remember stuff, right? And this is New York. This is beginning to erode on total a little bit, but you don't ask people in New York what they do for a living. A lot of people are doing some like cash businesses. They may not be totally illegal, but they're, guys who run restaurants or whatever, I'm not saying they're money laundering, a lot of them aren't, but they might not be reporting everything and da-da-da-da-da. And people have a lot of different kinds of hustles, right? So I go to but it would maybe come up at parties, and parties was a big part of, well, a lot of people's scenes, but certainly the weed scene. But I was conversant in everything from sports. I'm a huge tennis fan. I know the major American sports. I follow them, right? I know stuff about, I worked in statistics for a while. I did go to college, right? So if topics came up, I would steer the conversation to those topics. And we would talk about topics, not so much about Jimmy, not so much about what Jimmy does, right? And it was that kind of thing. And then there were sections here. I had a few customers who were cops. Like I like to say, cops are people. And people get hot, right? Didn't the Beatles say everybody smokes pot? That was the end of Walrus, right? And so that was not all cops want to just go around busting people, particularly their friends, right? And again, I was certainly raised with a certain amount of paranoia about that, but some of my mentors said, no, that's the wrong attitude. Like if you're going, like you're leaving the subway and there's some cops standing there and you know, you could go there and cross them, or you go the other way, cross them. Just stay relaxed, right? Develop your performance, right? Every now and then, something will happen where you really have to either move really quickly, right? Or, you know, or I've had times I've had to move my place of business because we got the word that maybe some people who shouldn't know about, even if they knew about the building, I moved, right? So it's, you know, I forget the Paul Simon lyric exactly, but staying a step ahead of the county line or something was an important part of the whole thing. And then you sort of develop a personality, but everybody develops personality, right? And we dealers are people as well, not just cops.
Well, there you go. We could all be invisible right in front of everybody else, right?
That's why I wear the shades.
There you go. Just like Jimmy. All right, well, again, they're gonna close the cash register, so if you're gonna get a book, I would say go get it now. And then Jimmy and Nan are gonna be available here to sign your books, and if you have any other questions, you're more than welcome to come on up, and thank you all for being here, and have a great evening, right? Yes, thank you.
Peace out.
Yeah, I have to say.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Yeah.